Welcome back. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wylie, for joining our committee today. I'm very interested in the structure of SCL. We're trying to figure out SCL, Cambridge Analytica, Aggregate IQ. And when I look at SCL, I mean, they were involved in psychological warfare, rumor campaigns. They got paid by NATO. They were working around the world. Then they seem to have morphed into this election machine. Can you explain the structure of SCL to us?
Sure. So something that might interest the committee is that I believe that, in fact, some of the work that SCL was doing for NATO was actually funded by the Canadian government. So something that you might be interested in looking at with the Department of Defense in Ottawa is that relationship there. In terms of the structure of SCL, it had several iterations over time. So when I was there, it was considered a group company where you had the same set of shareholders and board members on several different companies which shared the same name, SCL. And then each of the companies within the group company specialized in a different area of work. So the largest at the time when I joined was SCL Defense. So the majority of the work that SCL Group did was defense related. You also had SCL Elections, which was a much smaller consultancy that did elections work, usually in developing countries. SCL Social, which did work that usually didn't fit into either defense or politics. So, for example, if you had a healthcare project, that might be SCL Social, and then SCL Commercial, which did commercial projects. When Cambridge Analytica was set up, the formal relationship that it had when the intellectual property was transferred was from SCL Elections to Cambridge Analytica. So Cambridge Analytica was set up in the United States. It acquired not SCL Elections itself, but merely the intellectual property of SCL Elections. So SCL Elections assigned its IP to Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica, in return, provided a license to that same intellectual property back to SCL Elections with a second contract which guaranteed that all work from Cambridge Analytica would be performed by SCL Elections. So that was sort of the basic setup. I can go into more detail if you'd like.
Well, we will get there. So Brittany Kaiser testified that Aggregate IQ was the exclusive digital data engineering partner of Cambridge Analytica. Yeah. And Chris Vickery also stated that they were the digital development team. So how does Aggregate IQ fit in here?
Okay, so in around the end of October or November of 2013, when SCL decided to scale and sort of prioritize development of technology solutions, I reached out to Jeff Sylvester and Zach Massingham and asked if they were interested in coming and working on projects in London. But because they had new families and they were sort of already established in Canada, it was difficult for them to move. So the arrangement was that they would set up a Canadian company. They would be able to work in Canada, and the front-facing brand would still be SCL or SCL Canada, but they were able to remain in Canada as they worked. So Aggregate IQ was set up. The first project that they worked on was Trinidad. The arrangement that they had with SCL was that any work that they performed for SCL would then be owned by SCL. So the intellectual property that was being developed at the time was then assigned or transferred to SCL. So you could sort of think of Aggregate IQ a bit like a franchise, if you will.
Okay, so We have the documents, and I think they were probably supplied by you, that SCL identifies Zach Massingham as head of SCL Canada. There's a phone that goes to Zach Massingham as the head of SCL Canada. He said there's absolutely no connection. Is that credible?
No, that's completely false. So the reason why Aggregate IQ was set up in the first place was because there were projects that SCL was running, and then later Cambridge Analytica was running, that they needed a team of engineers to support. And the arrangement was that Aggregate IQ would perform that work and then exclusively license it to SCL, and then operate under the auspices of SCL Canada. So
why would Zach Massingham tell our committee such an obvious falsehood when there's documents? That's the question that we don't understand.
I can't speak to what the intentions or reason why.
But you have
Zach
said that
Massingham
what they sorry to interrupt, but you have said that they've been very careful, technically correct in what they say, but they use weasel words. Why would you say that?
So the reason why I said weasel words is because it is technically true that Aggregate IQ was not part of SCL technically, because it was a separately registered company in a separate country. However, the intellectual property licensing arrangements and the contractual arrangements and the development work were all exclusive with SCL. So the reason I said that is because it is very, very, very technically true that Aggregate IQ is a separate company, but that doesn't mean that the intellectual property that it was developing, it owned. SCL owned the intellectual property that it was developing.
Sorry, just to close this off, but you also said that they were a proxy money laundering operation in the Brexit Leave campaign. Did you not say that?
So when you look at the relationship that Aggregate IQ had with many of the different campaign groups on the Leave side, and that all of those different campaign groups all received donations, in some cases very, very sizable donations from Vote Leave, where that money then all went to Aggregate IQ. To me, that looks like a proxy for breaking campaign spending law in the United Kingdom. And so the issue that I have, and in fact, Facebook recently confirmed to the Electoral Commission and to the British Parliament that, in fact, Aggregate IQ had some of the same custom audiences and lookalike audiences that were based on their work for Vote Leave for some of these other entities. So what has been established so far is that money went from Vote Leave to another campaign and went to the same service provider for the same work that Vote Leave had, and Facebook has now confirmed that, in fact, some of the targeting and the target universes were the exact same. So I don't know, if calling it money laundering per se is the technically correct way of expressing that relationship, but in the general sense, it does look like the relationship that it had with all of the Leave campaigns was to obfuscate electoral law in the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Angus.